and it seems like my microphone seems so loud. It's not usually this loud. Okay, so I'm freaking out. I'd like to welcome all of you, and I'd especially like to welcome our student that came. You know, I like I told you, I said hallelujah because it's really, you know, to encourage more students to come is such a great thing. So thank you for being here. Thank you. Okay, and all of you also don't feel hurt. I'd like to welcome all of you also.
Most of them are students too.
And what's that?
Most of them are students too. They also.
Oh yeah, we're all students of life. All right. It was really interesting. One of my students came up to me the other day and he said, "Mr. Abeta," he said, I heard a quote. He said, "Don't let education get in the way of learning." Whoa, scared me. So this will be, as most of you know, by the end of the meeting, this will be my last meeting as a chair. So it was very, very interesting. It was really a year that was full of a lot of things to deal with, and it was a good year for me, and I learned a lot. Okay, we'd like to adopt the agenda. Are there a motion to accept the agenda?
So moved.
All right, those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Those against, anyone? Okay, so the motion passes. Randy, President's report.
Mr. Chair, members of the board, I don't have a whole lot to say other than what's in the report. I just do want to once again give recognition to the nursing program for receiving 8 years of accreditation with no conditions. As you know, we were one of 55 programs up for accreditation this year. 8 did not receive accreditation at all. I believe it's 34 or 35 got accreditations with conditions, and we were among the 19 who didn't have any conditions on our accreditation. So that's a great feat for Carmen Angel and Jenny Landon and all of the nursing program staff that's over there. At the next board meeting, I'm going to be able to feature a couple of other, we have a couple of students that just got accepted to the STEM internship program at New Mexico Tech, and so I'll have a little more details on that because that just happened. They both those students get I believe it's a $4,000 stipend, a housing allowance, college credit, and they're both doing projects related to algae and biofuels. So that's exciting, so we'll feature that next time around. So I think that's about all I want to do on the President's report today. So let's go ahead into the Employee of the Month award and the Pass It Forward award. Joanne, I don't think you were here last month to accept yours, but anyway, Joanne was the awardee last month, and this month she's nominated Magali Gomez. So won't both of you come up?
Joanne, you might want to just pull up another chair there.
So Joanne works in our technology services desk area specialist and has been here off and on for a number of years.
Many years.
Magali is our manager of our cashier's office.
Chairman Board, President Grissom, members of the board, I nominated Ms. Magali Gomez for the outstanding customer service that she does at the cashier's office. She is one of the only departments that has ever called our office on any critical time to say if anybody has problems making payments, you send them to me. She makes special arrangements for all of our students that are in Kids Campus so that they can have payment plans. She makes special arrangements so that we can have extra terminals set out in front of the cashier's office to make it easier for our students to make their payments. And so I think that is just incredible. So I just wanted to say thank you, Magali.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Can I say something?
Ali, did you need to say something?
I just want to thank Joanne and all of you. I just want to thank Joanne and all of you. The recognition is really welcome. I mean, I appreciate it greatly. So thank you so much. I'm very happy working here at the college.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair,
Oh, Pablo.
if I may, I'd like to say, I've met Ms. Gomez before, and she made a presentation the other day, and I think it was at the luncheon that we had. You were very articulate and presented yourself very well. And so I'm pleased to also echo my congratulations to you and to keep up the good work. And I know that you have a good relationship with your staff members as well. Felicitaciones.
Muchísimas gracias. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
And the WOWgram, I don't know if either one is here, but Angela Ortiz, who's our lead instructor in Allied Health, nominated Ernestine Jones, who's the office administrator in Allied Health, and I don't believe either one of them is here tonight.
I have the nomination.
Okay, we can read that.
They both were occupied, but when Angela nominated Ernestine, she said, "Thank you for all your help and thank you for being so friendly." And she particularly mentioned how she addressed employees' needs, her quality approach, and her commitment to coworkers.
Thank you.
Good. Thank you. Donna, do we have any public comments? We're going to find out right now. We do not. Do not?
I'm sorry, no? Okay, can you just sign your name?
Okay.
Last time I tried it didn't work either, so that's all right.
Yes, my name is Jerry Wells, and I'm a neighbor of the community college. I live at 14A Dean's Court, and I'm here tonight to kind of get a feel from the board, community college board, as to their feelings on supporting a southeast connector exit for Santa Fe Community College. As the southeast connector is currently being discussed, and as is laid out with the survey stakes out there, it would appear that it would be an ideal situation to connect to that road on the east side of the community college, which would alleviate a lot of traffic down Richards and also on College Drive, which I am somewhat concerned with because, frankly, the exit onto College Drive is kind of dangerous anymore. Students are not stopping, they're running the light. I've had visitors come in to visit me and they say, I almost got run over by people running that sign out there. And I feel that it will remove some of that congestion off of it. We have no problem with most students coming in the way they are, but there's going to be an accident out there someday. And I figure the best solution would be to have the southeast connector as the secondary main road into the community college. And I would request that you support that if at all possible. Thank you.
Before you leave, Mr. Chairman.
We don't,
We usually on public comment, we don't.
Okay.
but we should say to you, sir, that we're prohibited from making, from engaging in a conversation because we never know what goes, and we can only talk about what is on the published agenda. That's part of the open meetings law. So that's why it's difficult for us sometimes when we'd like to say, engage you in that conversation.
But
thank
our
you.
president can talk to you at
Yes.
any time if you would like to schedule something. Thank you.
I guess that's all.
No, but did you want to go, Randy? Did you want to go talk to him at all, or not really? No. Just let him.
He signed in, I can contact him.
Okay, all right. All right, Faculty Senate report.
Chair,
How you doing?
President. Just quickly, I know you guys have a lot on your agenda with the budget, so I'll be quick. we submitted the minutes. I believe Phyllis had submitted them. But a few things I want to discuss just about what we're accomplishing or our plans to accomplish in the future will be. We are looking at the shared governance policy. That needs a little revamping. I think everyone's in agreement on that one. So we're going to be looking at that. We've created a task force to look at that. The workload policy, we're a little behind on reviewing it. We plan to review it every 3 years. So we'll go ahead and we've just met today, Margaret and Tricia Fenn, Robert Shankton, and Marcy Iannarino. We met today, and so we'll get that rolling. Those two policies, we'd like to have them to the board by late fall semester so that we can implement them by spring possibly. So we'll kind of look at that time schedule, just so we can kind of speed things up. A few other points that we have with Faculty Senate. We have set up an AAUP charter membership. An advocacy chapter here at the college. The president is Miranda Merkelin. She is an adjunct faculty member. The vice chair, or the vice, I guess it is the vice chair, is Sean Miller, and then Andrew Kerr is the secretary. So this will kind of bring a little different balance to Faculty Senate and kind of help look at some of the professional issues nationally that I think are important that we need to really look at and address, especially if we look at the workload policy and shared governance. And it's nice also to have some adjunct involvement in that. I think that's extremely important since that's a majority of our teaching force right now. And the last thing is we have elections for the chair and communications officer. So those will be held within the next few weeks before we hit the summer break. So we've got that. So we've got nominations out there, and we'll be meeting Friday to determine who the nominees are. So, nutshell, that's about it. So are there any questions or?
Thank you.
Just a
Yeah.
quick question on the shared governance policy. Is that something you're working in conjunction with all the other groups?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we're just starting the steps. Yeah, and we're reviewing it. And I believe, who's the member of the board that's working on that?
Well, actually, we've appointed members of the board. We've appointed a task force to look at it as a whole, and Yash is helping to lead that from the executive committee standpoint. So,
Yeah, and we have Faculty Senate involvement as well as faculty members.
and obviously, whatever we come
Staff.
up with, we'll go through each of the shared governance to.
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
I have a question.
Martha?
How do you envision the Academic Senate and the AAUP chapter working in tandem, separating out their functions, or?
Well, AAUP is really outside of Faculty Senate. They're not really from my understanding, that, and I would have liked some of the members to come in. We just set up the chapter 2 weeks ago, so so we're still a little new at this. But it can work outside of Faculty Senate and do things that we may not do or want to do in terms of approaching it from a faculty standpoint, because we also have the national backing. And I think looking at the best practices, I find that that's kind of a good thing to look at when we're dealing with the AAUP and just some of the issues that are coming up.
Thank you.
So.
Well, I think it's positive. I think it's good to have a voice and national ties and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a positive thing.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it'll bring some nice professionalism, or more professionalism, and we have that backing, especially now that we're looking at a larger full-time faculty body, and also with the adjuncts, get them more involved and build some more community, because I think that's really important here, that we've got to do that. Mm-hmm. So.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you.
Staff Senate?
Thank you very much, and thank you for all the hard work I'm sure you're having to do on the budget right now. First, I want to announce that Susan Lemke has stepped down as Staff Senate Chair and has gone on a sabbatical. We hope that she'll come back someday, but she's gone for now. And the Staff Senate replaced her with Janelle Johnson, who's now the new co-chair of the, she couldn't make it this evening, but you'll be getting to know her. She was a former officer of Staff Senate, and she's going to be serving until September when we're having elections for new officers, but she's going to fill in until then at least, and we'll see where things go after that. We've been working, again, we're also working on the shared governance, and we think that's going to be a real positive thing. We may come to some small changes in policy to bring to you earlier, and then a more broad overview of the whole policy to come forward later on. Looking at it, it seems as though we have a relatively strong and a good shared governance policy, better than a lot of other institutions that we've been looking at in the staff senate, but it's certainly that we want to tweak it and get the best of all worlds involved there. I had mentioned earlier that we do have a group that's looking at a variety of different policies in HR. There are two things that came up in our last meeting that we did want to bring forward to the board to let you know that there are things that probably will need some sort of a policy change. One is there are a few, I don't know how many are left now, but there are a few people who are long-term temp employees who do not get health benefits. And that was kind of a lingering issue over the years that was concerned with the Affordable Care Act. Now those people are being penalized for not having health insurance, and so that's becoming a bigger issue for those people. So that's something we definitely want to look into and work out how that gets resolved. The other issue that's something that I don't think has been thought about that much in the past is 2 holidays a year. One is our spring recess that usually happens sometime close to Easter, and the other one being the Thanksgiving holiday, where we have part-time employees who work primarily on weekends. And so when we're looking at compensation for the missed days in those holidays, we only look at the Monday through Friday part. So we have a number of employees who primarily work weekends. Because they're part-time, they get 4 hours compensation for the holiday, when really they're losing 16 or 20 hours of work during that time. So they're losing 16 hours of work, but they're getting 4 hours of compensation when really all their work happens during the period when the recess is happening. It's something we think needs to be looked at, is how do we deal with them, because we're not addressing the fact that people do work weekends here, and the people who work weekends are actually losing 2 days and not just 1 day of work during the holiday. So that's something we hope to look into further as time goes forward. But that is pretty much it for the staff senate for this time. But we, again, are looking a lot at shared governance, and we're pretty happy about the way changes have been happening and how things are progressing. There's a lot of issues still to be worked out about how shared governance works. We haven't used our full shared governance for a couple of years, and we're excited about it and to see how it works, and we're very thankful for the stability that we've been gaining in the last few months.
I have a question.
Yes.
Having been here as a staff member for over 20 years, I always felt that there was never a lot of strong attendance and representation. What are you doing as part of the staff senate to look at all the departments and to somehow document that you have representation from all of the departments, not just one or two, and I was always concerned about that, and I know that the president and administration, upper administration does support, the staff does go to meetings and stuff like that, but how is the attendance and how are you doing all that?
Attendance varies from time to time, and usually it's greater when there's an issue, and usually it's greater among the people who share that issue. That's something we're taking very seriously. We have a committee that's working on how we can boost. One thing we're finding is some people didn't believe that they were members of Staff Senate, and so we've been working on our email list of what we found is our all-staff email list was including faculty, student workers, anybody who is an employee at all. And so we've honed down our list so that the email list is people who really are members. We're now going out in groups to speak to each department to talk about their involvement, how they can be involved. Starting next Wednesday for 2 weeks, we're going to have elections on a new constitution that we've created. And the new constitution is really only the base structure. We're having bylaws that are where we're looking into whether or not we want to go to a representative structure where people from each department are represented. We've translated everything that we're working on into Spanish, and we're going out into areas where it's primarily Spanish speakers, like in maintenance and in food service, to make sure that we're fully representing them and we have 3 different ways people can vote on our Constitution, either in person, by email, or by ballot in 4 different locations on campus. So we're really trying to do as much outreach to expand that. We want to represent the whole of all of the staff, and it's a priority of ours. So in the next meeting, I can tell you how many people voted in our constitutional election. We're hoping it is well above 50%, which would be a first, I think. And so we are making efforts, and if you have ideas, we're very open, and it is a priority of ours to include everyone who is staff here. And we are finding there are some areas where people have told us their supervisors are not allowing us to come to meetings. We're working on resolving those issues. If that persists, we'll probably be back to talk to you about that.
Any other
Yes.
questions?
I see in your minutes, you're talking about doing some events that are fun things, and I
Yes.
think that's a really good idea. I think, especially now when, we're trying to bring the campus together to heal from some difficult times, that these kinds of ideas and events would really be great to have people feel more camaraderie and trust of each other, because I think we do need to rebuild trust.
We're going to see too, we're seeing if we might get a badminton tournament of faculty against the staff, against the students, against the administrators, and do a little tournament and see how that goes. But anything to try to get people more engaged with each other, I think is a real positive.
Yeah,
So
and
does the board want to be part of the
invite the
badminton
board,
tournament?
too.
Or-
Some kind of the event.
don't want
Some of
me
the
on that.
events. You don't want to be on the badminton group.
Everybody's afraid. No one thinks they'll be good at badminton, so we'll see.
Thank you.
But it's an equal opportunity. We'll all fail together. So.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Anything else?
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you so much.
Do we have a representative of student government for student government report?
Sean was not feeling well.
Very ill. He
Okay,
was walking pneumonia, so he
Oh, no.
all right. So tab C, approval of consent agenda. We have the minutes from the special closed meeting, March 4th, special board meeting, March 11th, regular board meeting, March 26th. And so do we have a motion to approve those?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? The motion passes. Then we're moving on to, actually, we're skipping D and moving into E. Action items. So approval of the financial report. Brian? You're quicker than I am, buddy.
All right. Get situated here. Good evening, Mr. Chairman, Mr. President, and members of the board. I'm pleased to briefly announce that there were no adverse happenings or unusual happenings in the month of March, so we can be fairly quick with the financial report and then move on to the budget. Let's look at page E1, if you wouldn't mind. And again, as I try to do with this report, I'll be brief and then open the floor for questions that you might have. I want to point out to you in our cash balances at March 31st, you might notice in the First National Bank depository account the $365,000. As we talked about last month, those were reserve funds that were used for one of our legal settlements. That funds have now been issued from that account, which you'll see in the coming report for the end of April. And as we've also talked about, you can see in the LGIP account labeled New Mexico State Investment Pool, the $1.24 million that we're holding in reserve, as we have discussed in the work session. Overall, our cash position is such that, as you can see from at the lower right of page E1, projected next month coverage is healthy. And we have every reason to believe, as I mentioned last month, as we get closer to the end of the year, I think that we'll be in a suitable cash position to complete our responsibilities through the end of the fiscal year. Page E16, you might notice that, again, I've been saying this every month just to make sure it's clear, that after the correction we made in November to make sure that this report was actual rather than prospective, you can see that the gray bars for this year are lower than they were a year ago. However, the most important thing that has not to do with cash balances as what's included in the number. Most important thing you might notice, though, is that the gray bars are quite precisely tracking the striped bars, which again is typical, and that indicates to the board that our finances are operating in essence on the same pattern that they do every year, which is a good thing.
Except at a much lower level.
Well, I would suggest, Ms. Siegel, yes. In actual fact, on the graph, and as we talked about a few weeks ago and last month, the president and I worked with the board perhaps to revise this report. The issue here is not that the gray bars are actually much lower, it's that those striped bars are actually too high. And it's really not splitting a hair because they weren't actual numbers. It's not a criticism, it's a perspective on how to do the report. We just need to revamp that graph is what it boils down to. But mainly we're tracking correctly. Page E1H, as we talked about last month, there continues to be a gap between prospective revenues and actual revenues in this year. And again, this cannot be separated from E1I, looking at expenditures. And again, as we've talked about a few times before now, we had a bubble in expenditures resulting from activities last August. We adjusted that with budget adjustment request number 1, and as we get closer to the end of the year, you will see that budget, the blue and the red lines will converge so that budgeted revenues and actuals come back together. In fact, that is one of the significant adjustments on budget adjustment request number 2 is now to reflect in particular local appropriations more closely with the county formula now that we've got a better idea of how it will look closing in on year end. So we should see those numbers converge. You might also notice on E1I in regard to expenditures that as I told you, I think it was November or December I expected to happen, you notice that the expenditure lines have actually now begun to converge, and that should remain that way for the remainder of the fiscal year. No excitement, which is a good thing, on page E1J. We are basically on pace with what we expected to do in most areas, and we are making adjustments for bar 2 to make sure areas where we diverge are representative of what we more accurately expect to occur. In general, at this point, we're 75% through the fiscal year. In general, at this point, total revenues, we're running just slightly above what we expected to happen, and expenditures were right on pace. So if we hold that position, we should go into year end pretty much at even money, which again is a good thing.
Well, can you speak to that fund balance?
Which one? The beginning balance?
The negative fund, ending fund balance?
Yes. That is the result of adjustments in these balances. And again, this is part of what we're fixing with bar 2. What you're seeing flow through, you notice, Ms. Siegel, in the beginning balance, this is the adjustment that we first talked about in October that we had to make because the beginning balance was not correct on this report. It's correct on the books. It wasn't correct on this report. And then at the bottom, what you're seeing now is budgeted transfers are at $1.2 million. We won't approach that. And so for this report at March 31st, we're simply allowing adjustments to flow through to the fund balances at the bottom. But what you'll see that those are corrected with bar 2, and you see that number come positive back to where it should be. This is to say those are actually, that fund balance is more a result of accounting entries than it is of actual financial happenings, but to reflect what's happening this year. But you'll see it correct here in the next month or so.
Okay.
E1K, a good piece of news that you can't quite see yet, and that is in regard to Kids Campus. Maggie Zinn has been very carefully tracking since January. I had reported to the board, Bob McWilliams and I had told the board that we thought our range of subsidy was somewhere between $96,000 and about $120,000. And it looks like that number was actually much more conservative than it will actually be. And Maggie is now projecting that number to be somewhere in the low 90s. So again, it's still being subsidized. But from budgeted, it was budgeted 2 years ago at $330,000, and then this year, as you can see, was budgeted at $238,000. So to have an actual that's below $100,000, I think is really good improvement. And it may actually be less than that, but Maggie never wants me to tell the board the best case scenario, and I think that's probably wise. So the point is that the number will be at least better than what we thought. So that's
Just so I don't forget, what amount are we budgeting in the next fiscal year as the deficit for?
That's a very interesting question.
Well, you can tell me. when
I
we
can
get to the
answer
budget.
that question, and thank you,
Okay.
Mr. President. I cannot remember if we did not hold them flat because they have food services being provided this year by grant funds. And that's significant because previously they had $137,000, I think $595 in expenses, of which more than $100,000 was food service, that this year does not need to come from operational money. So it may be almost flat. I'm sorry, I just know there were so many of those detailed org sheets I just don't remember.
Because when I
But I'll
looked
check
at
on
that
it.
sheet, it appeared there was no deficit projected.
This sheet is only showing the expenses. You have the revenue somewhere else.
Yeah, that's right. Let me, if I can respond to you on that later. I've got a summary. I'll email you as soon as I get back to a chair from Maggie that shows you what the whole picture looks like.
Okay.
But in essence, if the subsidy comes down to $95,000 or so, and we have removed about $108,000 of operational expense from the budget because of the food service, then I believe what we're going to show is pretty close to zero. The only reason I would be uncomfortable with that is that that's a large increment of change from one fiscal year to the next.
Yeah, huge.
And I probably would be inclined actually maybe to show it a little bit more conservatively than that. But let me check. I'm
Okay.
sorry. I don't have it off the top of my head.
Ryan, what do you attribute that to? Attribute to the
Well, there are a number of factors, Mr. Cedillo. There are a number of factors involved in that, mainly having to do with changes in enrollment and in the streamlining of the operation that occurred over the last year or so. And so in regard to kids camps, you have two things that occur over about the last 18 months. You have improvement in the revenue stream, and you also have improvement in the expense stream. And then this is a major change. I'm not sure, Mr. President, you may know what the change was that resulted in grant funds being used for food service. I'm not sure what I have all the details on that. But when you factor that in, what Maggie has been working on for the last year and a half is simply to have a more effective operation, and so she has squeezed it from both sides, and it's been very effective. And I'd be glad to send the board again. I've got her little pro forma summary budget. I'll be glad to send it out here.
Mr. Chairman and members of the board, I'm pretty sure we actually applied for some funds that we had not been applying for.
That we have not what?
That we had not been applying for.
And
And I don't know, I think the rules may have changed that allowed us to do that.
And don't we have
We have a number of small grants. We have a number of small grants and one big one, yes.
And then we might flip forward to E1L and just take a look at food service and East Wing Eatery. East Wing Eatery, since our last report, has had a little bit of a reversal, although the eatery I want to point out just from the most top-down level in the process of being recast from an auxiliary unit to an instructional unit, which is what I believe it should be. Working with Vice President Peters, Vice President Gonzalez, and Dr. Finns, we really have made a good change with East Wing Eatery. They had kind of a perfect storm in March, which was that they had spring break, so their revenue for about 10 days went to zero. At the same time, they had to replenish their inventories in order to facilitate the changes we were making in the operation. And so that's why they have an expense, a little bit of an over expenditure in this month. Now you will see as we move forward into fiscal year 15, East Wing Eatery has now been moved into Exhibit 10 as an instructional unit, and so this will become a neutral issue. This has a number of benefits to the institution, not just from an accounting standpoint, which will make it easier, but food services, there is some difficulty when you have large quantities of bulk food, making sure everybody knows who's using what, who it belongs to, and how it should be costed out. We have a ringer in the accounting department, which is that Andy Daddio, our Director of Capital Accounts, happens to be a veteran food service CFO here in Santa Fe. So we have eyes on this, and I think next year in general you'll see these numbers look different, both as an instructional unit and in terms of the flows.
Just a question on that. So is that then we're just hiding the losses in an instructional unit, or?
Let me address that.
Yes.
What we're doing is we can justify a little bit of a subsidy because
Yeah.
it's an instructional lab. But what we're also doing is we're going to be enrolling the students in more internships. We're actually going to get the credits in tuition. And we haven't been doing that as much, so we're going to be doing more of that. So we'll
So
have
it
more
won't-
students enrolled in more courses.
Okay.
So revenues will be in a different place than in revenues for selling food, but there are revenues.
Yes.
Okay.
And they are actually doing a better job of, they're doing all kind of specials and pasta bars and things, and I have a feeling you're going to see the revenues jump drastically in April. It's got quite popular.
Well, and a key advantage, one of the first discussions I ever had about East Wing Eatery with Dr. Finns, is that when you have an instructional unit that you attempt to account for as kind of a business enterprise, it doesn't really make sense. And that's one of the reasons, it's one of the first conversations, first questions I believe you ever asked me is what the heck is going on with the food services? And that's one of the problems. So I think the president's, I think it's an apt observation, is that now we'll have the ability to track all the revenues. We can see where it's coming from. It's a benefit to the eatery. There are more ways for it to be productive. It's a good move, and we've got several models, and again, our academic peers also have perspective on this, but it's a good change, in my opinion.
Brian, go back to K, and why did the radio tower expenditures go up so much?
Radio tower expenditures, we were just having this this conversation recently, Mr. Chairman. Radio tower expenditures and revenues are somewhat convoluted. And what this has to do is accounting reclassifications in this year. I can send you detail on that if you would like to see it. But again, one of the things that's happening in these reports, we're in a process of cleaning these numbers up and make sure they work correctly. The radio tower has been somewhat ambiguous for several years. We're trying to get that cleaned up, but as we roll these accounting entries through, it gives the appearance that this has occurred.
Thank you.
I think it's an accounting entry rather than a de facto expenditure. And we're back on L. Oh, one thing I want to point out in regard to food services, this is just a challenge of the year. We're 75% of the way through the year. And if you look at the budgeted revenues and expenditures, food services would be budgeted at 75% to have revenue at $720,000, and it would have expenditures at about $646,000. And as you can see, this is just the flow of this type of business entity on campus where it actually is an enterprise type unit. Revenues are slightly down, they're 2% down. Costs are about 7% up, which is not too out of line with inflation for the area. So we'll be watching this for the next 3 months as we move toward the end of the year. I don't have a comment on that other than you might observe it, and that's one of the reasons why if you put the slightly reduced profit margin, for lack of a better phrase. It's not quite correct, but if you the slightly reduced profit margin for food services together with the expenditures in March that hit the East Wing Eatery, that's why this number, this 22,815, is larger than we saw last month. I believe you'll see that correct as we get closer to year end. Bookstore is doing great, and as usual is profitable. Again, bad use of the word in our environment. E1M, we're maintaining about $1.5 million in unrestricted plant funds that we regard as a reserve. And here again, Chairman Abeta, this is one of the areas as we work through Bar 2, we've been, as we've mentioned to the board, we've been in the process of reclassifying temporary employees and various things. And so some of these things, you see entries that it may appear that there's an expenditure here when in fact what it is an accounting entry to move somebody. In general, though, unrestricted plant funds have been stable through the year.
Wait, where are we on that one?
We're looking at E1M center columns.
M.
Right, E1M, I'm sorry.
Okay, oh, I see, the 1 point. Then why in our projected budget? Well, I'll ask that later, never mind. I'll wait.
This is plant funds.
Yes, I know.
Right, we're in capital outlay. We're the other orbit. But that approximately $1.5 million in unrestricted plant funds, together with the $1.25 million in cash reserves in LGIP, as the president and I have mentioned to the board in the course of working on the budget, represents about $2.7, $2.8 million in reserves.
But this plant fund, the 1.5 is not bond money, or is?
Well, it's fund balance. This is unrestricted.
Right.
Bond
So
money
it's
is
not
restricted,
bond.
so that's right. So it's available to us for internal use. That's correct.
Okay.
For internal transfer. As opposed to plant restricted, you might, over on the left,
Yes.
Siegel, right, there's the 15 million that belongs to the voters, and we don't use that internally. So overall, at March 31st, 75% through the year, we've taken a few blows and lumps this year, but overall, we're stable at March 31st. I would characterize operations as nominal, and we will continue to be so through the end of the fiscal year.
So just on the receivables, do you think we're going to collect some of these 90 days and over receivables before the end of the fiscal year?
We typically do collect them, but Ms. Siegel, I would not, having gone back, especially recently, having gone back and looked through a few years of data on this, I would just not promise you anything. They literally, in the same sense that written off receivables or various other things out there that we eventually will probably get, that's as much as we can say.
Mr. Chairman, I would just add that we almost always collect from the federal government.
Yes.
Just very,
Very slow. It's very slow.
we always have
Yes.
90-day and older
That's right.
in the higher ed department.
That's right. It's
And the Small Business Administration?
Federal government.
the collection rate's very high. It's just like watching a glacier move. It's very slow.
A question about the what we're owed from HED. So do they pay us on a monthly basis? Break down on the formula? Is that why we have
Apparently not.
so well? They're supposed to. Is that why we have so many months that it keep adding up that they haven't paid us for?
Which I'm sorry.
I'm looking
sorry,
at
Member
New
Keith.
Mexico
Fine, I
Higher
can
Education.
take
Okay, go ahead.
Higher ed.
Our regular appropriation comes automatically every month, but we have special projects through them.
Okay.
And those are the ones that we have to bill for and get things done differently, so.
Okay. That's 150,000. Thank you. Great.
So I think on our grant expenditures, we actually talked about this the other day, about what Oh, this is fiscal year 11-12.
That's probably mislabeled, actually.
Oh, okay, yeah.
We got there at the same
So
time.
it's,
That should
it's,
be this
it's
year. It
it's
should
this
be this
year.
year.
So
That's-
we have,
I'll get that.
we have budgeted 25 million in grant. That's an average amount per year? Or safe to say that's approximately what we get every year from various grants?
Is that the 1 year, or is that the cumulative total of the value of
Well,
it?
right, yeah. Is this well, the actual must be the actual money we have received this year, right?
Or will receive, are there multiple year contracts or grants that
Or
you get
will receive, right.
some portion of it each year?
That's correct.
Because you can get a grant that is 500,000, but it's 250,000 each
Right.
year, for example.
But, so which is it? The actual is whatever we got, received this
This
year,
year.
and it could be a grant that's multiple year.
The actual is what I would expect to see as we complete the fiscal year. That's correct.
These are expenditures. This is what we,
Right. So I'm hoping that the
right. But
revenue is equal to
just from a
that.
couple, just from a couple of ones that I know, what's on there for the budget is a one-year budget.
How it is?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so, in some cases, and oftentimes in grants, you get behind on expenditures because you budget for the first year and you don't get approvals from the granting agency, and so you're 4 months in before you start spending, and so you end up with a no-cost extension at the other end. So, but we have spent that amount of money thus far this year on those ones at the top. And instruction, and there's more in the different ones.
Then where is our grant revenue indicated in our financials? It's not.
Well, the financials that the board sees are our instructional
Right,
and
just-
general operational
We
financials.
never see the.
But we do a quarterly financial statement that is more in the format we submit to HED, that is more in the format of the audited financials. And that would be an easy thing to supply to the board, because it is much easier to see the flow of the grants as they apply to the institutions.
I think.
And yes, I
I
should.
think it's a wash, yes, but I think it's, and I know I brought this up before, is that it's good to see that we indeed have this revenue flowing through. So we're not just a $35 million budget, we're a $60 million budget when you add in
Right,
what's
about
been an average of $25 million in grants.
about 48. But I think that and Mr. President, you might correct me if you differ here, but I think the important thing from both an accounting theory and a reporting standpoint is that those really are not revenues of the institution in the sense that we would treat them for purposes of decision making. Those really are discrete.
Right.
And so they're treated in the same sense as capital outlay. They rotate through their own orbit. That does not make it easy to look at them necessarily, but
Just add,
But on the other hand-
almost all grants on a reimbursement basis.
Yeah.
Right.
But it's still money coming to the college.
Well, this is
We are responsible.
for purposes of this report, yes, absolutely. And as we've talked about, this is a summer 14 project. I strongly agree with the board, and the President and I have talked about it a great deal. This report needs to be more revealing to the board so that you can see those flows. We have other reports that if you looked at them, you would go, oh, there it is, and we really need to work on that. I agree with that. The information is available, and I would prefer for the board actually to see it more in the way it looks in the financials.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, I want to add, as we're going through our project with Cognos, we're going to be putting together different reports, and I want to see reports that have all revenues grouped up. Then we can drill down, and you can see where the sources are, all expenses summarized. So you'll see institutional as well as, when you drill down, then you'll see this is ING, this is grant, this is whatever else. And so those are some of the reports that we will hopefully be able to produce within the next year.
Yeah, no, we'll work on that soon. In fact, Yash Morimoto, who's our resident Excel wizard, actually has taken an initial pass on a drill down report. And, there's a balance between information. There's just so much and so we looked at it, but we're getting there, and everybody is on the same page about wanting to get that information. We've got good ideas. Okay. It'll take a few months. We'll try a few things.
Martha?
In addition to I think the numbers are terribly important, but I think one of the things that is a great education for the board is for us to know what those grants are supporting. Because I think we often get asked questions about this program out there that we may know nothing about because we don't have adequate reporting structures on what are these grants doing? What are they, what is this money paying for? So I would encourage us, in addition to getting reports on the numbers, that we also get information about how the grant is going, what it's supporting, what is the money paying for, and how is it impacting students?
Very good. We're going to actually, I'm hoping at the May board meeting to have Ann Black do an update on both grants and contract training. And so that'll kind of be a first foray into providing some additional information. And then based upon that, maybe, with your questions, we'll see what else you'd like to see to be useful.
Right, and I agree with that. And it might, Dr. Romero, it might be an effective use of some work session time going forward to actually just have a discussion about what type of reporting structure looks right. Because if we know, if the board says, okay, this is what we'd like to see, then we solve the technical problem, which I think is, in my experience, is a much better thing than coming in with drafts for 6 months in a row saying, what do you think about this?
Right.
We can do it in a few months. So anyway.
Okay.
Pablo?
I think it's very important to just to underscore what Dr. Romero stated and Linda is that the board needs to know, have an overview as to what this college is really doing. Those grants are very specific for certain projects, but we need to do, I think, a better job of informing the public as to what projects we actually have. It's more than just the instructions that we have, the degrees that we offer and the certificates, but this college is doing much more than that. It's launching into some very important things like algae fuels, like the microgrid. Those are things that are not necessarily in our budget, but they're programs that are important to this college. So this college is more than what people think it is.
Yes, I agree, Member Cedillo, and I would say from a reporting standpoint that when a financial professional wants to understand Santa Fe Community College, we don't look at internal reports. What we do is go to the Office of the State Auditor and we read the audited financial statements. And those reports are completely comprehensive. They go through a narrative from management that represents decisions of the board administration so that you understand the perspective, and then we go through many, many pages of detail. Now, the challenge with that is that report, I believe last year, was 84 pages long. And so the balance to be struck is one of having a thoroughness of information, which we've already agreed, I believe, that this is why it would be good to have a financial oversight group where we can dig into those and somebody can say, what does that last year's financial look like? And if it takes an hour to go through it, it does. But there's a continuum for reporting, from providing minimal information that explains to you where the checking account is, to explaining extremely copious detail, as you know from your government service, of extremely copious detail of exactly what's happening. And I would sincerely welcome, as we work together with the President's office to come up with a good reporting structure, I would very much welcome input from the board about what the board simply would like to see, what's appropriate. And in regard to any of those other issues, my office is certainly always open. If I don't have the answer, I usually can figure out who does in regard to those details. But I strongly agree. I think in general, I think what we're collectively agreeing is we need to revise our reporting structure. And that simply is a matter of taking the time to do so.
Mr. Chairman, just a comment. I think we need to look at all of our reports. You need financial reports that provide better data at a summary level that allow you to drill down as far as you want. But you also need those programmatic reports, because that's what we're doing. And I agree with you. There's no, I think it's very hard for all of us to know what all we're doing. And we need to figure out a way to gather that information easily and share it. So that's something we will work on.
Mr. Chair,
I'm sorry, Kathy.
I move approval of the financial report for March 2014.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All those in favor, or any discussion first? All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? No? Okay, so the motion passes. And so let's move on to the next one. Financial state budget approval request.
This is our budget adjustment request number 2 for FY14.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Mr. President. I'm sorry, I don't know what exhibit number. E2A, I see. Mine does not have the exhibit number on it. We're looking at exhibit E2A, and we will use that for item B as well as for item F, the approval of the fiscal year 15 budget. Column we're looking at here is bar number 2. Our challenge in going into the second budget adjustment request for fiscal year 14, as I have previously discussed with the board, is that subsequent to the budget that we submitted to HED on May 1st of 2013, certain financial effects were put in place, which were ongoing costs of approximately $2.4 million, approximately evenly divided between our Exhibit 10, which is instructional salaries, and Exhibit 18, which is the Office of Information Technology, OIT. Now, those two effects resulted in a bar number 1, where we had to make a forecast of increased revenue and a number of other adjustments in order to roll forward, as we've talked about, which is why we had the difference in the red and the blue lines on the revenue graph. Our objective in bar number 2 was to tighten down the revenue estimate, particularly in regard to mill levy appropriations, to maintain, to the best of our ability, the employee issues that were affected by the events of last year, because these are people we hired and we're responsible for their salaries and benefits. And then at the same time, we had 2 issues that needed to be corrected, which were that we had employees that were simply in the wrong place in last year's budget. In particular, we had several $100,000 a year of temporary employees who were running through our 91,000 fund series, which were capital funds, and they needed to be moved over to operational funds in plant operations and maintenance. So when you look at bar number 2, comparing it to fiscal year 13 actuals, there are a number of things that you see. The mill levy projected amount is larger than last year's actuals. As we have talked about, that is based on using the county's estimating formula, and also went back and trended 6 years of actuals to make sure that the what we were projecting fit with the trend, and this is the number that the county formula gave me when we did that estimate. Looking down at expenditures going into bar 2, what you'll notice here is the large effect in instruction. We were going from $14.4 million to $16.1 million in instruction. This is almost entirely salary effects. Office of Planning and Institutional Effectiveness had some changes, some of which were new staff so they could do their job, others of which were reclasses, again, to make sure that that their exhibit was correct. And so you see, in effect, there in institutional support. Other areas, for instance, Exhibit Org 4101, the finance area, we had several people retire, so we had some small net reductions, but this is why you see that $300,000 change. Plant operations and maintenance, you see change from the fiscal year 13 actuals at $3.9 million to $4.2 million, and this effect is, I believe, entirely the result of our accounting reclassification to get the employees in the right place. There's a very large change in the transfer amount at the bottom of bar number 2. And as we have talked about in our last few budget work sessions, that is largely because, well, for one thing, we are slowing down with our capital projects, and so we don't have as much need to do capital transfers this year. But last year's $5.3 million transfer involved a very large required audit adjustment in order to make sure the fund balance was correct. We simply don't have that burden this year. So going into bar number 2, this is the reason for the changes. We've worked hard to get these numbers right in bar number 2. I believe it's largely correct. We made about $800,000 in various budgetary cuts, as we've talked about in our board work session, to make sure that this budget was balanced. And so this is what we'll be sending with board approval. This is what we'll be sending to HED as our final budget adjustment request for fiscal year 14 next week on the 1st.
But we're dealing only with bar 2 at this point.
Right now, we're just right now. What we're dealing with is just bar 2. Two board approvals tonight. One for our final budget adjustment request, the other for the new budget. They're both due the same day on May 1st.
Mr. Chair, I would move approval of bar 2.
Second.
Second.
Then I have a question.
Okay, go ahead.
The local appropriations, which from the 13 actuals going up, what, about 1.3?
Almost 2 billion.
1.3.
Yeah,
$1.3 million. You said this. Okay, my question is, you got that number pretty much from Santa Fe County, is what you said.
The county promulgates a fairly complicated spreadsheet where you actually, using their spreadsheet, Member Siegel, you actually reverse engineer the number. It requires you to go in and put in all your parameters and assumptions and that kind of thing. And then once you're done, it spits out your rate and then applies that to values. And so I did that, and again, I wasn't completely comfortable with that number, so I trended it over 6 years just to see if it looked like it would work. And our trend, as I mentioned in the work session yesterday, is a plus 5.3% a year. So
but this is still a projection for the fiscal year we're coming out of. I mean, we're ending.
Mr. Chair and members Siegel, it's a combination. We already have received.
We have some of it.
We have some of it. So we know what we're going to receive for the second half of what we already received in December, pretty much. So we're pretty sure this is yes. This is actually lower than what we had projected in bar number 1. So we've taken a more conservative approach.
Right, that's right. I just with bar number 1, I felt like that the projection could be more accurate, and so as I told the board when we approved that in December, we would go through another round of this, and we did. So, and again, this is the number, this number as well as the one we'll talk about for fiscal year 15. These are not ad hoc estimates or just trying to do our best to look in the crystal ball. These are formulaic, and you make a set of assumptions based on a number of different things: collection, percentage rate of collection of uncollected property taxes, inflation rates, and a variety of other things.
And what percentage of that dollar amount have we gotten in?
11 million. I have to go back and look at actuals.
If I remember correctly, Brian, we have 11 million, and we should get another. We got 6 million something in December, and that should be half of what we're going to get. So we should be getting another 6 something million in June. So that should bring us up easily to this number.
Yeah, that's correct. 10.56 million at March 31st.
Pablo?
So Brian, will we know from the county what our appropriation will be?
In about 30 to 45 days, we'll know what the last payment will be quite precisely. We also should have a better idea at the next board meeting of what they expect in terms of delinquent accounts and various other things. Delinquent accounts are a significant number to us because our portion of those is about $1 million a year. And the collection rate is actually, it's kind of like the receivables we were talking about. Our collection rate is actually very high, typically, between 95 and 98%. The issue is that you don't always know when that appropriation is going to arrive. So the timing, sometimes it occurs before the end of June, sometimes it has occurred in July. Once we know those numbers, our auditors allow us to accrue at June 30th, once we know what the number is, in order to prevent financial harm to the institution. So we'll know more as we progress.
Okay. Any other comments? Well, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor of approving the BART 2 for the budget approval, in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion passes. All right, Brian, if we could go into faculty compensation.
President?
Actually, I'm going to take this, Mr. Chairman. Based upon the work we've done in our work sessions, I'm going to make the following recommendations for full-time faculty salaries. The regular faculty salary schedule effective fall 2014 will remain the same as the previous year, except for the changes in the notes section. And all we've really done in the notes section is saying faculty will only move a step at the end of the year unless they will automatically move unless the board declares a financial crisis. And those who are at the top step are frozen there but are eligible for any cost of living adjustments granted by the board. Also for next year, I'm recommending that all current full-time faculty at step 10 receive a 1.5% cost of living adjustment, and that all current full-time faculty below step 10 who've completed a full year contract will move to the next step.
I move approval.
Second.
All right, all those in favor of the faculty compensation?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion passes. Next one, approval of staff compensation.
Actually, there's another piece to faculty, and that's the adjunct. So I'm going to recommend that the adjunct faculty salary schedule be increased by 1.5% across the board. It changes the schedule to, the schedule will be changed to reflect a 1% increase in all the steps.
A 1% increase?
1.5% increase, excuse me, 1.5%.
Move approval.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? That motion passes, which is actually with the other, right?
Yeah, but it's two separate schedules.
Oh, okay. All right, now staff compensation?
I'm recommending to the board that all regular and temp term staff employed as of June 30th, 2014 have their salaries increased by 1.5% effective July 1st. And then I'm also recommended that on the miscellaneous wage and salary schedule that it be updated so that student workers and temp 1 workers be paid $10.66 per hour, which is the new minimum wage in Santa Fe County.
Move to approve.
Second.
All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? That motion passes. I really feel good that the students are going to get paid $10.66.
A good raise, going from $8 to $10.66.
Yeah.
The next one, approval of tuition and fees.
Move to table.
Is it going to be tabled? No second?
I thought we weren't doing.
No, we actually have
We
a
have to
recommendation.
approve them, though.
Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot we have those others. Okay.
Okay.
I retract.
So, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, I'm recommending that at the present time tuition remain the same next year. But we do make changes in the facility fee for the fitness center be increased by $5 to a total of $75 per student. This is charged only once, no matter how many times you take the class in the fitness center. I'm also recommending that we remove the audit fee for health, physical education, and recreation courses, and that also all other fees, including but not limited to the service fee, student government association fee, and course lab fees will be reviewed by college administration and are subject to change with approval by the college president.
So moved.
Second.
Is there any comment? I think that the comment I'd like to make is that, you know, so many times I think that that you know we see throughout the state that many organizations are raising their tuition, and I think it's the board and the president. We're committed to, you know, to doing the best we can for students, but I think also that there are times that we just have to expect that there might be something coming up as a tuition as a tuition increase, whatever that might be, I think so. Let's keep that in the back of our mind.
Mr. Chairman, I'd also like to make a comment about the fitness center fees. By raising the $5 fee, we're going to bring in some additional revenue, but we're going to lose some revenue from waiving the audit fee. But this is something I think that for a large portion of our population was not happy when we implemented that a year or so ago, and so we will get the word out that you can take a hyper course for audit and you don't have to pay an extra fee.
That's good.
Mr. Chair, our in-district tuition is still at $39.50, and that we haven't raised that, I believe, in 4 years. And so I believe that we have talked about that we'd like to have some discussions with the students about, in the future, looking at increasing this at some point, because we are still one of the lowest tuitions in the entire state, and it is an important source of revenue for us so that we can improve all of our areas of functioning in the college.
Mr. Chair, I'd just like to point out, of the 18 community colleges in New Mexico, we're the 5th lowest at $39.50 for in-district tuition. The lowest is $35, the highest is $82. And that we are going to we're going to do some long-term planning over this next year to look at what are our needs over the next 5 to 7 years and try to figure out, what portion of that do we have to meet from tuition increases. And we'll try to keep that as low as we can, but we hope to have a conversation with students as we move through next year on anything we might want to do with tuition and what we would use those tuition revenues for.
The balance of that is that we, in addition to trying to keep the tuition as low as possible, we also want to ensure that the services that we provide for our students, the equipment that they train on, the quality of our faculty are of very high quality and up to date. And so that's another factor that we think about when we think about how low can we keep tuition and still provide a very high quality education to our students.
Good. Kathy, I think it's really great, and having our student here, we want to encourage input from students, that so many places it's like the administration just makes a decision, and I think that the board is in agreement that, that we want that student input, because we want, and we really feel that the students will understand, well, we need this, we need that, and so we need that input. So get the word out to the street. I think it's critical.
Mr. Chair, I do want to thank the president for coming up with the solution for eliminating that audit fee, because I think that was a thorn in some of our students' sides, particularly some of our seniors who take courses at the fitness center and really enjoy and value our programs and our instructors and coming to that, and it was hard for them to pay that audit fee, and I appreciate that you found a solution so that we can eliminate that and bring people back, I hope.
Yeah, I think so. I agree also. Yeah. Any other comments? Okay, so we have a motion and a second. So all those in favor of the motion that's on the floor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? The motion passes. Now, Brian, approval of the fiscal year 15 budget for submission to New Mexico Higher Ed Department.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and this will put us back on the same exhibit that we looked at earlier.
It's not going to be the right. It's not going to be.
Oh, that's right. I forgot. You're working from the revision. That's right. So refer to your handout.
Hot off the press.
Thank you.
Do we take this off then?
Janet,
Literally hot out there, Brett. Yes, we should remove that. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, Mr. President, and ladies and gentlemen, members of the board, the budget process this year, the objectives of the fiscal year 15 budget are extremely complex. And they are complex because we are in the process of this budget having to make significant corrections for actions that were taken in July and August of 2013 that, as I mentioned in regard to budget adjustment request number 2, have ongoing financial effects for the institution that involve real people earning real paychecks and who cannot be treated, of course, as accounting entries. And so as a result of that, we had 3 objectives that we had to accomplish in this budget. I believe we have done so, and I believe we have done so meticulously, and I believe we have done so fastidiously. The first is that the President directed my staff and I to go through with his assistance over the last few months, and actually even before President Grissom was President Grissom, we were already working together, as the board knows, with a team to figure out what had occurred with the fiscal year 14 budget, and we had started the analytical work. When the president was appointed November 18th of last year, one of the first conversations we had is, let's get to work on the budget. And even though we have come down to the wire simply because our fiscal year has been a few months delayed this year in various ways, over the last several weeks we have meticulously gone through every single line. If there is a spreadsheet cell or a line item or an employee or an expense that either the president or I or the two of us together or my staff have not been through, I do not know what it is. And so in our effort to make sure it's accurate, I believe that we have accomplished that. Secondly, the second objective of the fiscal year 15 budget was to maintain the security of those employees who were hired last year. And I want to emphasize to the board, we talk about $2.4 million worth of hiring. That's a lot of hiring. That represents about 7.5% of our overall annual budget, about 10% of total payroll. But we were determined that those employees would remain employees of Santa Fe Community College, and in fact our employees would be put first in the budget process, which is the commitment for all the adjustments and various things we've made in recent weeks. We have not wavered from that at all, and I'm very pleased that in the budget that we'll go through in just a moment, we've accounted for everyone. And everyone is secure going forward in terms of this budget. The third objective of this budget, adding to the already complex issue of taking care of employees, is that the President felt very strongly, and I strongly concurred after the difficulties of the last year or two, that we wanted every employee of the institution to receive some kind of raise. And we were hoping that as we went through the legislative sessions and as we came down to the wire with Senate Bill 313, because there was agreement on Capitol Hill about this issue at the Roundhouse, and we were hoping actually that the numbers might be somewhat larger. The complexity for our budget is that the governor directed a 1.5% average salary increase for all employees of higher education. But because of the way they do their calculation, as we communicated to the board earlier today, their calculation resulted in an appropriation of about $104,755. For us to accomplish that directive required about $557,000. And that's, without even giving you a specific number, that's a very large difference. However, I'm very pleased to be able to present to the board a fiscal year 15 budget that accomplishes all 3 of those major objectives. It is accurate. The details are correct. We will not be having to go back and forth with HED over finding errors. It will be accurate when they receive it the first time. Our employees are taken care of, and this budget does successfully achieve a 1.5% salary increase for all employees, including benefits, which we estimate at 30%, which is 0.59% higher than our actual, just to be conservative. And this does include, as the President mentioned earlier, I think, the 2.5% step increase. I think you mentioned that a little while ago. So this budget accomplishes what we needed to do. I do regard this as a budget where we are recovering to some extent from issues from last year, but the budget is solid, and I think if we work together to maintain it, that it presents the platform for us over the next few years to ensure the fiscal health of the institution. Let's run through this. Please interrupt me at any point with questions, and I'll just run through the column on the far right of your exhibit and make sure that you know what is in these numbers. Tuition and fees, $7.341 million.
Before you start.
I'm sorry?
Question. Is there a copy somewhere for people to see since there's nothing?
Here's some if somebody needs them. Janet, you need to keep one of these in case you need them for the press.
Right.
This took a,
I just feel bad. This is a complicated.
Thank
so
you for
that
the
it-
reminder. I knew I did it. Just
Thank you.
didn't remember where they were.
Brian, are these additional copies too?
It's a, yes, but those are the board's copies.
just to make sure everybody's looking at the same one, the ending fund balance, the bottom right column should be $164,681.
Right.
We've had several versions that we've looked at today, so.
And yesterday.
And yesterday.
Right. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I will, again, I'll work through the column on the far right. Please interrupt me at any point with questions. Tuition and fees at 7.341, actually rounding to $7.342 million, is flat in regard to tuition. That is the same $6.642 million that was in the prior year budget, because as has already been discussed, we're not anticipating a tuition increase, except to the extent that we might have increased enrollment. The actual major change in these two numbers is that we realized in the course of detailing the budget that we had $459,000 in distance learning revenue that had not been budgeted last year. It actually will occur this year, but was not a budget line item. So that is included here. We also had a revenue increase in regard to grant expenditures. Grant expenditures must be offset by offsetting revenues, and so that number is included here, and that's what comprises the change in tuition and the fees number. State appropriations is directly from the bottom line of the LFC sanded version of Senate Bill 313. And as you know, we go through several iterations. Whichever budget survives in the legislative process then goes through a sanding process where it's adjusted by LFC, and so this is their final number. This number includes $238,500 for nursing expansion, which we were glad to receive from the state legislature, and that number is also expensed off in Exhibit 10 in the nursing program. As we spoke about earlier, the $17.9 million in local appropriations is based on the county formula. It does trend out, as I mentioned in work session, it trends out within about $75,000 to $80,000 of my trend work, and so I think it's probably an accurate number. I've researched these numbers mainly to find out what local professionals are saying about property values, and we have good reason to believe that we will meet this, and we may actually have some good news when we see valuations here in June. I would very much like to report to the board that in our budget adjustment request in a few months that we'll correct this so it looks better than it does. And again, this is formula based. The $458,000 in other sources is the $300,000 that we budget every year for various pieces of various revenues that are coming in that are not otherwise accounted for. And this also includes $158,000 for HEC revenue. That would be the current year's $140,000 in fees from our partner institutions, plus $18,000 for SBDC rent. They are going to be renting at $1,500 a month from HEC beginning in a few months, and that provides your total revenue picture. Expenditures, questions? All right, expenditures, as we have discussed earlier, expenditures include, let me go through the list, in fact, of what we have changed just in the last few days. Expenditures include, and let me take these in total rather than by exhibit because I think it's easier to understand. We have in total $509,000 in salary increases included in these numbers. That includes approximately $164,000 for the 2.5% step increase that is included in Exhibit 10. The remaining approximately $360,000 is distributed across the other exhibits based on the proportion of payroll represented there. That entire $509,000 is subject to 30% benefits, which is about another $160,000. That too is ratably distributed across the exhibits within the budget so that it tracks total payroll. The budget includes the required ERB increase of $164,800. It includes the required health insurance increase of $41,835. And then one of the other things we did in this budget that I think is an impressive accomplishment is that to accomplish Bar 2, we cut approximately $800,000 in a wide variety of areas around the campus, and we were able to restore the vast majority of that. I would say probably in excess of 85 or 90% of those dollars were restored. And those dollars that were not restored were actually not restored by agreement of the president working with various department heads around the campus. So overall, we've achieved the raise, we've achieved the benefit increase mandated by the raise, we've achieved the mandated ERB increase, a required health insurance increase, maintained most of our departmental budgets. As we have previously discussed, we have looked very, very hard at a wide variety of expenditures and are continuing to do so to make sure that anything that is either unnecessary or can be affected or can be negotiated for various purposes is adjusted appropriately. The one thing the budget does that I feel very strongly is a great achievement for this budget coming out of the last year is that we did our very best to maintain and service as many institutional objectives and core priorities as we possibly can. I know of no core priorities that were compromised. I know of no key departmental objectives that were compromised. And where there is belt tightening in a few areas, it's belt tightening that we needed to tighten our belts. It was not done to create pain. So by and large, I think it is a fairly stated budget. I believe it is an accurate budget, and I believe that, again, with appropriate financial oversight in the next fiscal year, I think it's a budget that will serve us well.
Randy, comment?
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, I want to make a couple of comments before we answer any questions. I want to reiterate, especially for the employees that are here, that there is an increase in your take-home pay in this ERB switch. Yes. So there's a 0.75% contribution that was being charged to the employee during the recession that is now being charged back to the employer. So it doesn't increase your gross pay, but it will increase your take-home pay from that standpoint. So this budget does include and recognize that extra expense for the college. It includes the raises we talked about. And a couple of major changes here. It does include a director for our emergency medical services program and a clinical coordinator so that we can restore that program and add the paramedic program this fall that is needed by our community. So those are in the budget for this year. There are other items that were requested as we went through the budget process this year. Some of them have been built in to the budget. Most of those were fairly small. We hope that when we get the June final revenue estimates that we may be able to do a couple of more things, but this is pretty much where the budget is going to be. I feel pretty good with it. We're going to have to watch our expenditures a little more closely than we have, but we'll make this work, and we will actually be expanding our programs at the same time that we're watching our expenses better.
Pablo?
Mr. Chairman, I don't have any questions. I just have a comment. I just would like to commend Interim President Grisham and his executive staff and his executive team, and certainly you, Brian, and your staff for being very diligent and careful about preparing this budget, correcting the errors that we've had in the past, and hopefully that we are on the road to recovery and to really be more than just solvent, but to have money in the bank for future needs. And I feel very comfortable about this particular budget.
To add to that, in the little time I've been on the board, this breakdown that we had was great. Great detail, and I think that the board has to, and we're asking for more detail. But the thing is, this is the best I've seen since I've been on the board of just the breakdown and the focusing in on the different things that I think it's great. So Brian and Randy, thank you, and all and plus your staff that worked so hard on this. Thank you, and thank you so much.
Well, the one good thing about having a president who is a former vice president of finance is that he knows what we're capable of producing and what the board would want to see, and I think that's a good thing.
We need to thank all those people that are sitting out there.
We need to thank all that's
had roles in helping us figure out what we needed and where we could maybe.
That's right. I really would want the board to know in response to both of those comments, Member Cedillo and Mr. Chairman, the number of people involved in accomplishing. I want to make sure that the board understands, because I take personally very little credit for the accomplishment, other than simply overseeing my area of it. We started with a team of 9 people in August, who were all department heads, and I would say between the 9 of us probably affected 200, maybe 250 employees on this campus. And we worked as a collective for a number of months. So this budget, there are probably about half the people receiving a raise in this budget probably have got hands in it somewhere along the way. And so I think probably the greatest achievement, I mentioned this to the board once before in work session, I believe the greatest achievement of the fiscal year 15 budget is that in my 30-year career in accounting, this is one of the most collaborative processes I've ever seen. It's an astonishing number of people. It was slow. We started too late. Next year we'll start earlier, but the general process, I think, is the way we should do it, so that the board has transparency and so do our employees. Overall, I think a great achievement.
Any other comments?
I move approval of the.
You had to comment.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I actually just have some questions. I don't know if we want to do that under discussion. That's fine.
I move approval of the FY15 budget.
Second that motion.
All right. Comments?
Mr. Chair, just a couple of questions. First of all, when we look through the budget, there's a significant change in our expenditures on the Office of Information Technology. And you pointed that out earlier, that we've made over the last year over $1 million worth of investment in our OIT. And so my question is, and this may come to the president or the CFO, what are we investing in? So what are we getting for our additional dollars in OIT?
Let me take that, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, and Member Keith. A couple of things. Number one, we're replacing some of our outsourced contracts with in-house employees, and that's going to save us some dollars in the long term. We're updating our systems, and we're actually going to make, for the first time since we bought them many years ago, we're going to make full use of the systems that we've purchased. We haven't really been using all the modules, and we're doing a lot of cleanup and setup. And I really think that the backbone of this, as well as the backbone of all the infrastructure for classes and for students and for the organization, is going to be what's going to allow us to be more efficient and more effective in our work environment. So it's a mix. We're getting some people in lieu of outsourced contracts. We're getting a lot of updated software, updated, I don't want to say customization because that's a bad word, but the way our setup, we've got to fix our setups of our various systems so that we can use them to their full extent. And I think that's going to pay off in the long run. And then our students and faculty and staff are getting access to the latest technologies. Our employers are using the latest technologies, we have to be teaching the latest technologies so that our graduates are going to work knowing what they can do. We had some really old computers and in computer labs here for a while, and we've updated all of them.
And I might add, Ms. Keith, two observations, I think, from the financial management perspective. One is that one of our core institutional concerns is making sure that our accounting systems and our academic systems can talk to each other. We use a pervasive, astonishingly pervasive software platform, the Banner platform. It's very common in higher education, but it has to work correctly. And so that is also one of the key benefits. We made tremendous strides. A detail that sometimes the board wants to see it, I can show you, is what the work plan looks like to make that all work. It's an astonishing piece of material that Casey Allen and Amy Tilley worked together to develop. Very large 2-year project. And then one other thing I think it's important for the board to understand is just a financial management philosophy for this CFO. I insisted that my staff not opine on the propriety of the budget content, because I believe that it gets confusing when the financial managers begin to opine on the propriety of whether they agree with the board's decision or whether some department head really needs something, and so we didn't do that. The president and his academic team looked at the content of this budget to determine whether or not we needed it or not, and if we needed it, and I would suggest that this is one of the convolutions of 2013. The board was not wrong to authorize significant movement. As Dr. Romero has repeatedly argued, the board was correct to authorize the movement, enhancement of our technological resources. That was the correct thing to do. The issue was that it was financially not handled correctly, but in this budget we've managed to fix that. So I think this is an important, as we work together again as a team, I think it's important that we financial people make sure the finances are correct, and on the academic and executive side, we leave that to them to qualify it. So we didn't, again, looking at the magnitude, yes, you're right. We look at it and say it's a $1.2 million increase, to which my question is to the president, do we need this or not? The president says yes, and the board agrees, then from that point, we just got to make the budget work, and I think we effectively did.
Thank you. I have a follow-up question.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. So the Higher Education Center, obviously a priority to us since it is under construction right now, and we'll be walking in hopefully January 1st to start classes there. Will you talk about the impacts in this budget of a Higher Education Center?
Yes, the Higher Education Center, we have put together a pro forma 5-year income and expense statement, I guess I would say. At the Higher Education Center, our best estimate of expenditures is approximately $625,000 per year. But 2015 is somewhat complicated for a variety of reasons, because it's impossible for HEC in this year, while we're opening it in the middle of the fiscal year and we're constructing it, and our director of facilities is working over there, and Santa Fe Community College security officers are patrolling the site, and all these convolutions are occurring. So the effect on this budget of HEC is about $300,000. We have quite a few shared costs, and the bulk of what we are expensing through the institutional budget actually has to do, as we have spoken about earlier, with technological infrastructure that we have to have, that Dr. De La Rosa is overseeing with OIT. These expenditures are coming online at various times. Some things have to be in place earlier than others. You don't have to have lights on necessarily until October 1st, and other things occur in January, and so that's the impact.
Can I add to that?
Yes, I'm sorry.
We're still working on the long-term budget, and you got to remember that sometimes when we first talked about building the Higher Education Center, we kind of talked in as though it was going to be 100% used by our higher education partners. We know that certainly is not the case, especially in the early years. We'd love to get to the point where it was used primarily Probably in the evenings, it will eventually be used almost exclusively by our higher education partners. But we're going to be using that facility to a great extent next year, for the second half of next year, and in the years after that. So part of the cost of operating that facility are going to fall on Santa Fe Community College to come up with the cost to cover it. We're going to do our best to work with our partners to cover as much of the cost as we can. It's going to be a very efficient building. 70% of the electrical power is going to be provided by solar power panels. So it should be a low-cost operation, but we still have to have maintenance people that can work there. We still have to have custodial people. We still have to have a director and an administration person. Luckily, with the SBDC program moving over there, we kind of got an anchor tenant in a way of some people that will be there every day, not just our partners. So we're going to keep working on that, and we'll give you a better update on that. But there is, in this budget, there is about $273,000 worth of IT infrastructure that is a one-time expenditure that has to be spent this year so we can open the building. That will not then be in future budgets. So that is a one-time expense that will come out in future years.
And just a final comment about that, Ms. Keith. Again, as I mentioned in a work session earlier, we met in the President's boardroom about, I guess it's been 3 or 4 weeks ago now, with all of the VPs of finance, CFOs of the 5 institutions, their academic counterparts. Support for HEC is very, very strong. And I know this is a subjective observation, but I've been in this chair for a long time and have been through these kind of expansions. And when you have an atmosphere of strong support, there's no question, it just was very, very clear in the meeting that everyone really wants the enterprise to succeed. So we're not, even though we're not exactly sure about the financial impact specifically of this year, and as the President said, we're working on a pro forma basis, it's a projected basis, I think that enterprise is actually going to do quite well. Among 5 institutions, $600,000 a year in expense, by the way, is not, we all agreed as CFOs, it's not as large an expenditure as the number itself would imply when it's divided up among the institutions. So, more information to come.
So I too am very concerned about the HEC and want to see it off to a great start. And I realize that this year can be a hard year for us. So I would like to, over the course of the year, have regular updates on where we are on that HEC budget as the information comes in from schools and we get partners who are signed on, what that budget and cost looks like, so that we make sure we keep a cap on it and we get off to a really good start at the HEC.
Agreed. I appreciate that. Our next event, as we spoke about earlier, is in May. We're going to reconvene that group and try to come up with our funding formula to make sure it works correctly. I have no doubt that once we solidify the formula that Dr. Ledusky-Taylor will want to be communicating to the board and let you know, because obviously we're all very concerned about seeing the complete picture. I would expect probably by July or August board meeting that we'll have a more clear picture where we've got some kind of pro forma we can report. I don't know if it'll occur in June. It may be a little premature, but I think by the end of the summer we'll know. We'll have more information.
Kathy, any more questions?
One last question.
Okay, go on.
So we were told as a board upon approving the FY14 budget that obviously we were doing some things that were a priority to the organization, which I voted for and supported, which was increasing our number of full-time faculty, which is important to our students to do, and also instituting a salary schedule that allowed our faculty to move up in range and be rewarded for that. There are gives and takes, though, and we were told that there were going to be offsets in our expenditures for that. And I have a request to see what really came out of those offsets. So one of the things that we were told was that we were going to a new structure. We were going to have 3 deans as opposed to 5 deans, and then a number of department chairs that were on 9-month contracts rather than 1-year contracts. And this would result in savings for us moving forward. I'm not sure that I can find those in this budget, and I would love a report, an analysis of what those savings are to us, if in fact there are any.
Randy?
Members of the board and Member Keith, we're going to do a complete analysis of that. I do not think that the savings that we thought are there. And so we are going to revisit whether the changes we made are the appropriate changes, and if so, how we're going to offset the fact that they cost us more. But we're going to look at that. I think one of the other challenges is we did not hire just the number of full-time faculty that were presented in the budget. We hired 8 more beyond that, and that was not in the budget that you voted on originally last year. And so we're they're all in the budget this year, but we've got to figure out if we may do something differently with the organization after we look at it this year. Maybe that we need to have more deans and not as many chairs. We just got to see what works out. But we are going to do an analysis this year.
Thank you.
Linda?
On that point, I do think assumptions were made and they did not come to fruition in this budget, which is why that this budget is so tight. And I think also another part of it, and this is a question for you, Brian, the fact that the LFC and Higher Education Department finds an arbitrary number to determine our staff and faculty salary amount. I'm wondering if there's anything that we can do about that. The arbitrary number is so significantly lower than the actual payroll of this college. Where do they get that number?
Well, there's and Mr. President, I'll make a brief comment and then get out of your way if you want to add to this. New Mexico Community Colleges achieved actually a remarkable victory in regard to this year's legislative process, and that is that HED, for a variety of reasons, started aggressively, I would say in early September, the first meeting that Yash Morimoto and I attended, where we heard serious discussion about a strongly performance-based appropriation schema. I believe it was about mid-September. And there was a tremendous amount of concern among the community colleges that was vocalized very strongly by presidents, CFOs, institutional effectiveness personnel. A wide variety of community college personnel expressed concern about it. And it was actually very gratifying in the legislative hearings when our peers in the state legislature also voiced concern and said, we don't believe that this is appropriate at this time. What is currently happening is that HED is moving forward with a rulemaking process where the attempt appears to be to move that agenda forward, but do so at the rule level rather than at the legislative level, which has the potential to adversely impact our voice. So I don't believe this debate is going to go away. However, there's been communications just in the last few days among the community college presidents. And I think the answer to the question, a strictly non-technical organizational communication observation, it is my observation that the community colleges, by really speaking up and making ourselves heard, really did move the mountain in this last legislative session, and I believe that's key. I believe that we need to be very vocal about the process. Very gratifying, by the way, to hear one of our presidents at a legislative session when UNM, I believe it was arguing why performance-based allocation would be advantageous to higher education in New Mexico. One of our NMICC presidents very eloquently argued in response, we have to account for the difference in what our institutions do. We serve different constituencies. We serve a different type of student. I know I don't sound like an accountant. I sound like a college professor, but that's another hat I wear. And so I think this is a key. At a technical level, financially, one of the things I'm committed to, just again looking at the schedule we looked at in work session today, is to try to correctly understand exactly how LFC is arriving at those numbers. It's very difficult. Even top drawer professionals, we've talked about Danny Earp, there are people who have been involved in this for a very long time who struggle to understand it, but somebody understands it, and that's one of my objectives for the summer is to get with LFC and see if we can unpack it.
And let me just add that the NMICC is meeting later this week. The funding formula as well as the differences in the ERB and salary increase impacts is the topic of conversation.
Oh, that's very good,
Also
because,
want to let you know LFC is actually scheduling hearings to talk about funding formula, but our concern is that HED is going to put it in rules,
right.
and
Then we're in
trouble.
But the fact that we receive $465,000 less than we should have proportionately to pay for those increased salaries, and yet it was a mandate to increase those salaries by a 1.5% average. So that's,
The real hard part is a marketing. Everybody thinks we got enough money to give 1.5% raises.
right, which we didn't.
We did not. We're doing 1.5% raises, but we're having to work hard to find the money to do so.
And consequently, our budget is quite lean, and I'm very concerned about that. I'm going to vote for this budget, but I reluctantly do so because of assumptions made by a prior administration which didn't come true, because of those issues with the salary increase that we didn't get the money for. I think it's put us in a difficult position, which we will weather. We've got a plan, and I know that we'll be working throughout the year to look for other revenue and to figure out how to keep the quality that we have, increase it where we are, and be committed to our faculty and staff. But this is a difficult budget year for us, I think. Thank you.
Any other comments?
I have a question that's not directly related to the budget, but since you brought up the formula, is performance funding on the table?
Yes.
Because it's causing all kinds of issues in other states.
Members of the board and Member Romero, we're really concerned. The formula that did get passed by the legislature certainly was more to the liking of the higher education institutions than the one that was proposed by the higher education department. But we're all, as we've now gotten into it a little further, have all realized there are no incentives for growth or new programs or dual credit. And those are all things that we've been working on for years, and so we're going to have to address those. But luckily, the percentage of the budget that they're giving us that's performance-based is small, but they gave us a base budget, but that base budget didn't allow for growth, and so it's a real challenge. We're a lucky institution in some ways in that over 50% of our funding comes from our local appropriations. But there are some community colleges in the state that's 85% dependent upon the state. They're in trouble. And
But it even affects the universities in terms
Absolutely.
of the erosion of quality
Yes.
in our degrees across the board.
All right.
Work hard
Okay, so we
to keep that up.
have a motion. I think it's been seconded, and we've had our comments. So all those in favor of approval of the fiscal year 15 budget? All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay, the motion passes. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you, Randy.
Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, thank you.
Matt?
All right. Mr. Sherman, thank you for waiting. You walked out a little while ago, and I said, I hope he comes back. And we'll be for the approval of resolution concerning single-use bottles. All right? You got it.
Well,
Can we start off?
yeah, please.
Okay, so Matt and a lot of other students have been working on this issue for quite some time. We've come up with a resolution that we would like the board to consider passing. It is not a ban on single-use plastic bottles, but it is a commitment to try to decrease and or hopefully eliminate those on campus. It's been through the various shared governance groups. In various iterations, we came up and kind of cleaned it up in a resolution. I do want to, we'll let Matt make some comments on this, but I do hope we pass this. But I do also want to say this is, in my view, this is a first step. As we're going through our policy process, I'm hoping that we'll come up with a comprehensive policy on sustainability for the campus that will become a policy and not just a resolution. And if this passes, I will be directing Janet Wise and her staff to come up with a marketing campaign to get the word out.
That's what I was going to say. Marketing is so important for something like that. And I wanted to mention something else. And, all of your public comments, now I can comment. I really appreciate that you came out and were here and telling us what's going on and really being there and being positive and outspoken about it. So, Matt, thank you.
Thank you, and I want to thank President Grissom for taking the document and putting it into a form that can enable us to establish further policy and move forward. Today I went to a sustainability committee meeting, and I think, that there's going to be progress over the next year here. I look forward to being a part of it.
I want to add an extra comment in that Matt sometimes gets on our nerves a little bit because he's so passionate. And we need people that are passionate, because we don't get change if we don't have those kind of people forcing us to do that. So I know you and I have had a few words on occasion, and we have healthy discussions, and I appreciate those. They have to be done. But I'm excited about the commitment that the college wants to make towards sustainability, and this is just another step in that line.
Thank you.
Well, wait.
Questions? You may have to take questions.
Well, I just want to thank you, too, for your persistence, and I have a question for the president. Why can't we just ban single-use bottles?
We could. We've had a little bit of an uproar from some areas to do so.
We don't want to limit people's choices. That's one of the major arguments, is limiting people's choices is something they get upset about. So our argument is we're not limiting your choices. We're just trying to make them a more sustainable option.
And we may get there. We may decide to ban them, but at this point in time, we felt like this is a first step.
All right, and then we'll develop a policy out of this. We'll have a policy.
And procedures and roles. And
I think, even this little bit really adds to the image of what Santa Fe Community College is. Not just the college, but the community itself. And I think it's critical. And we might, I think that the sooner the better if we can look for it. But I think just respecting other people's views, I think, is great also, So once again, but for not only speaking for the community, I think it's great. I think it's a good thing. I think this world thought and we can be an example, and I think that's wonderful.
yeah, raising awareness is the whole point.
Totally, man.
I have another question for the president. Have we banned plastic bags in the bookstore?
We have to check into that.
Okay.
Of course, we're in the county, but we're going to follow the city regulation.
Right.
Yep.
You'll check, okay.
Pablo?
Matt, thank you very much for bringing this. I think that we're celebrating more than 40 years of Earth Day today. And I think everybody ought to be very cognizant of our Earth and what we as humans have been doing to the Earth. So I think it's not a matter of following suit with what the city has done or what the counties think they're doing or have done. I think we ought to be a leader in promoting these efforts. And I think it's important that the city's already done it. They banned plastic bags. I think there's a lot of people are griping about having to bring their own bags to the grocery stores, but that's part of the education, and that's part of the commitment that we have. So I certainly commend you for, I've never met you, but somebody have already said your persistence. I like people that are persistent on good causes, so I congratulate you on that.
Thank you. I also wanted to mention for Earth Day, Janet Barry deserves some kudos for organizing Earth Day for the past 3 years I've been here.
And today, I know Member Cedillo was here, but today was an incredible day. The exhibits in the hall and the number of people that were in the hallway today was the most I've ever seen for an Earth Day.
Yes, I'd like to make another comment. I know that I'm not supposed to make a comment when in public comment, but I happen to know Jerry who spoke. He's the executive director of Sierra Club. And I've worked with Jerry before when I was with a senator, and I just wanted to somewhat just congratulate Jerry on what he's doing. I think it's important, and I didn't mean to be out of line when I was going to make a comment. I was certainly not going to make a comment about what he was requesting, because I have no idea what he's talking about.
We'll fill you in on that one.
Yeah.
We've all done it, Pablo.
All right. So do we have a motion and a second?
I make a motion.
Second.
All right. All those in favor of the resolution for single bottle use, all in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? You're lucky, because he's right here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt.
Motion passes. All right. The written reports, we have information items. Randy, did you need to do that, or was it?
Not unless if anybody on the board's got questions, otherwise we can just move on.
I don't. And strategic planning updates, do we? No?
We talked about briefly that.
I know. All right. It says that we have on tab G, Santa Fe Community College 2-25 mandatory new student orientation, hallelujah, and advising for first-year students. All right, so is that just an information item?
This is first reading.
Yeah.
Do you want questions now or later?
Either way you want to do it. We got Carmen here can answer some questions, but this is a new policy that has been through all the governance council process, and actually was the first item that went through the reconstituted governance council.
Oh, great.
And so it has been approved, and obviously this is a national trend. That to increase student success, you mandate new student orientation and advising. So, Carmen, you want to take questions or make any comments?
Mr. Chair, President, and members of the board, as the President said, it is a national standard and lots of research in this area. And basically, one of the things that we found last year when we were starting to open up the Center for Academic Transitions, that so many students self-advise. And when they self-advise, they stay here for 6-10 years because they're not taking the right classes. Yeah, some are here 20 years. So what we thought we would do is the first 15 hours, and they have to meet with an advisor. And, there was some discussion about they didn't want to do it after 15 hours because faculty have too much work, but we figured by doing it the first 15 hours, students would get a good background in why it's important, and then continue to seek out advising. So that's why we limited to 15 hours, and we're going to start out with first-time, full-time students, and then we will extend it to that. We're going to see how it works out first. And with new transfer students with 15 or fewer completed hours.
So I have a couple questions.
Mm-hmm.
So this is advising. This is not the course to learn how, this doesn't require the course to learn how to study, or this.
That's
separate.
Yeah, remember, see, that's a separate course. That's a first-year student success course.
Okay. And do we have a policy that says students have to do that course?
No, but they're highly encouraged to take it.
Okay.
And those that do take it find that it's very helpful.
Yeah. So.
And actually, in the retention, I think that Cheryl presented on the retention data that we've had with the Title V and the new student orientation and the first-year student success courses. We're having quite a bit of success with retention, and we'll bring that data to you.
We've been doing that for 2 years?
We're in our third year. We have 2 years after this.
Okay.
No, we've been doing the class since just a little over a year. The one credit class started in spring of last year. We're 3 years into the
We were doing something else.
There's a 3 credit course and a 1 credit course. The 1 credit course is for those students who score higher, and I'm tired tonight and I can't remember the exact cutoff score.
But developmental ed.
Huh?
Non-developmental ed.
Non-developmental ed.
But we've been doing the 3-hour course
For those that need more help.
So this only has to do with advising. And what,
And new student orientation. And the other thing that we find with new student orientation, if they attend it, they really benefit from it, and they find out all the different possibilities and help areas and everything here in the college. So both of them are, it's new student orientation and advising.
so what happens if I don't want to do it?
You can't register.
Really?
There'll be a hold put on your.
Okay, so
on
it
your-
is mandatory.
It's
You have to
mandatory,
be advised.
right.
Okay.
And that's why we're starting with the first-time, full-time student, because we can put a hold on their account.
But if a student comes in and it's their first year and they're maybe only going to take 6 hours or something, could they still get advised?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, yes. Mhm.
All right, so it's not mandatory, according to this.
Right. It's not mandatory for them, but but they still can get advised. And we highly encourage everybody to attend new student orientation.
The Achieving the Dream schools always say, students don't do optional.
No. It's true.
So that's sort of the mantra for both advising and for the student success course.
The research I did when I was in that position, and probably your position, is that students are going to be so much more successful. And we worked and worked and worked and tried to get it. Thank God it's been a national trend, and that students really need it, and that have you or will you be trying to possibly even form cohorts through orientation, or that's a whole other trip,
Chair Beta, we've actually been doing group advising, which has been very successful as well. And we do group advising in the new student orientation. And so we're trying all kinds of things.
I totally agree, and thank you for doing that, because I know students need it, and we want them to be here, but we also want them to possibly to transition into the HEC and to go on further. I see a lot of my students that I've advised and students I've worked with, even GED graduates that have gone on, and it's a wonderful feeling for us as teachers and advisors and as just employees of the college, because that's our number one, to the success of the student in the community, and so I think something like this is really great.
And I just want to tell you too about the new student orientation. We're going to have some special breakout sessions, and one is especially for veterans, and another one will be for transfer students, or for students who want to start here and then go to HEC or some other institution.
And you also do some where you bring family members in.
Yes, we bring parents in. They can come into new student orientation.
It'll be an all-day thing.
Yes,
there's meal provided.
It's an all-day thing, and there's at least 6 new student orientation dates.
In the fall?
No, they start soon.
Oh.
Kathy, did you have
Excuse
a
me.
comment?
I do. I'm sorry, here I am. Just a couple of questions. So, since we've been dealing with budget tonight for a very long time, Dr. Gonzalez, could you talk to us about what our ratio is of students to counselors, and if we have enough staff to meet the
Students to advisors.
right? So if we're requiring, as I read the policy, we're requiring that each student go through a counseling session. I guess you're
advising
saying
session.
An
That-
advising session. That could be a group advising session rather than one-on-one.
Right,
And
especially
that's how
their
we meet those
first,
numbers.
when they first come here, many of them have the same needs. So we do that, group advising. I don't know exactly what the ratio is, but we do bring temp advisors in during the heavy periods, like starting now. We'll have temp advisors along with our regular staff advisors. So we run people through pretty quickly.
And let me add to that too. So in addition to the people whose title is advisor, who works mostly in the Welcome Advising Center or in the CAD area, we have faculty that do advising, we have deans that do advising, we have chairs that do advising, we have vice presidents and presidents that do advising. So everybody does it in a different way. So I think most students will have an opportunity. I don't think that much is going to be impacted. I mean, my favorite thing to do has been advising students, to talk to them about what their goals are and to lay out a 3-year plan, if that's what it's going to be, to finish a degree. You just lay out, this is what you take this semester, this semester, this semester. And the students who go through that seem to complete. It's the ones that don't, that get lost.
Additionally, we have attended NACADA, which is the National, I forget what it stands for. Anyway, it's a advising council.
Academic
Advisors.
Whatever. Anyway, and through that, we have come up with the mission and goals and student learning outcomes and academic and advisor learning outcomes. So it's actually going to be a learning tool for students, and so that they can, they're going to learn a lot in the process of being advised. So.
Well, you touched on what I was going to ask. I was going to ask what kind of training your advisors get. Like the temporaries that come in, what kind of training is provided for them?
Well, the temporaries have been coming in for several years. I mean, at least the ones that we have now. So I don't know what kind of advising training they got, but we are planning advising training for faculty, and we do ongoing training with our staff. So.
Kathy?
So one more question. Is there an exception for hardships anywhere? So it's in the policy, it's pretty hard and fast. You must, it's mandatory. I'll give you a for example. When I first got into college, there was this great new policy that everybody had to take these beginning tests to prove that you were at a level. Obviously, it was a good tool because you had students who were coming out of high school, and that high school degree meant a lot of different things when you got to college, and they could determine whether you were, ready to start your courses or if you needed to do remedial test work. They offered the course, you could go and take the test every time on a Saturday morning, right, at 8 o'clock. And I had 9 different dates to choose from. The problem was I was employed as a student, and I worked the graveyard shift from midnight until 6 in the morning, and then the test was offered at 8 o'clock for 9 mornings in a row. So I ended up taking that test 3 times because it's really not most favorable to go take a 4-hour test after you've worked a graveyard shift. But there was no exception whatsoever, and I got to the point where they put a hold on all of my courses and moving forward until I could go and take their test. So I think it's always good to realize that at subsections, especially with the students that we have at Santa Fe Community College, that there may be hardships that exist.
Member Keith, yes, we are pretty aware of that, and actually we're right now developing an online new student orientation. And the reason for that is because people may not be able to make the dates, but we do have them at different times and on the weekend, so that they're not all Monday through Friday when people might be working. So the new student orientation, online student orientation, should be ready by fall. And we had one at New Mexico State, and we found that students, there's a lot of information that you get during new student orientation. So it's also a really good tool for them to use to go back and, they said something about tutoring. Where was that? I'm going to go back and look at that website. So we'll use it both in the new student orientation and for maybe those hardship cases. And there's always going to be exceptions, but you don't do policy by exception. So, we'll just deal with it one at a time.
And in addition to that, just like to add, a lot of times you can do advising over the phone.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't always have to be in person.
Right.
But if it's an all-day, if it's a
orientation is an all-day, but advising
doesn't have to be.
Mm-hmm. No, advising is like 30 minutes.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions?
Thank you, Carmen.
Thank
This
you.
will be up for your final reading
month.
next month.
Good.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you, Carmen.
Should go quick.
All right. Okay, so the next thing is election of officers. I suppose we'll need a motion. Pablo?
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to recommend a slate, if I may. I'm not going to do it individually. So I move that this board elect our new chairperson, Linda Segal, Vice Chair Martha Romero, and Secretary Kathy Keith. That is what I'm proposing.
Okay, do we have a second? That'll be me, I guess, because you two are.
Or you could not.
Okay, second. So those in favor?
Aye.
Aye?
Aye?
All right, the motion passes but just as a comment, I think that, what we've usually done, and most people know that, is that we have, every year, it's the vice chair becomes the chair, the secretary, et cetera. So, good. Take over.
So before you take over, I'd like to make a comment about your chairmanship during the past year. I have only been a member for 2 meetings, and I appreciate the work that you've done on the board and for this community college, and I've learned to know you pretty well and your passion, and your passions is the students, and I really appreciate that quality of you, Mr. Chairman.
Gracias. You're on.
No, I just wanted to talk about, you're still the chair till the end of the meeting. We talked about doing a June 14th retreat, and that date's not going to work if we want to use Tom Gonzalez, which we haven't decided yet, but would there be any objection to using him because he's helped us in the past? If so, we need to change the date.
Is he in California?
No, he's here.
He's right here.
He lives
He's
here.
local.
And did he have any other proposed dates?
Well, June 21st, I think, was one.
Yep.
Is that a possibility for
Was fine.
everybody?
What day is that?
June
Saturday.
21st?
What day is that?
Saturday?
Saturday.
We're looking at Saturdays, yeah.
Sure, that's fine with me.
Okay.
Fine.
And then maybe we would do something the night before, fun. We could go hear you play music or
I would recommend
have a
that,
dinner or something.
I would recommend that the night before, we meet early enough that we can all tour the programs and the campus. I happened to do this as part of the League of Women Voters tour, about a month ago? Not maybe quite that long. And I have to tell you that I was astounded, very impressed with the incredible facilities that this campus has. It's one thing to know it sort of in your head, but it's really quite another thing to tour the excellent equipment, the excellent capacity that we have to train nurses, to train in the solar and the biotechnology areas, to train. I mean, I was incredibly impressed with a welding shop. So every single part of the campus that we visited was a real eye-opener. Because when you see it in the real, when you see those robots in the nursing area, and they were actually doing simulations while we were there, you really get an idea of what incredible contribution this college is making. The art area, we visited with one of the artists, and we didn't, to my chagrin, tour the pottery kilns, but that's another area that is, we just have incredible facilities. So I would like for us to think about doing a Friday, maybe mid-afternoon event, tour. Yeah. And if if the instructors were available to sort of give us an overview, it would be terrific.
That'd be great to do. We'll have to make some arrangements since it will be summer.
Yeah.
There aren't as many classes on Fridays in the summer, but there's a lot going on in many of those areas every day. But
What I've been doing as a new board member is I have been scheduled meetings with the executive staff, and I'm meeting with them and visiting with them, and in the meantime visiting as well, because we do have a real jewel in this college. And the only way for me personally to get to know the people get to know what they're involved in, get to know the curriculum. It is just amazing. I mean, so I support your idea 100%.
And Chris, I just want to thank you for doing your time as chair. It's never an easy task.
You look happily relieved.
So, was that all?
Just
So-
next meetings and then adjournment, closed session.
Yeah. So I moved that we go into closed session for the purpose of discussing potential litigation, or is there personnel too?
Yes.
And personnel matters?
So we did move the board retreat.
Yes. Are you going to, somebody second the,
I second.
okay, all's in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay,
Thanks, everybody.
thank you.